Love is the law, will is the core, chaos its well, and holy the war. Hello, good evening, happy to see you, happy to see me. I do not know, but we're about to find out. I know it has been a while. Well, to be precise, about 8 months since my first book review on this channel. Read many books, I did a lot of things, art related, job related, life related, but there was no time at all for a book review, believe it or not. I was completely overwhelmed, but in recent weeks I squeezed somehow a fraction of what I consider a free time. The purpose of this video, of course, is to review a book. Which book? You are about to find out. I will try not to stretch the video very long. I try not to ramble. I don't want to spend hours and hours of editing. It's not that I don't like editing my videos and other stuff, but I just too much. But still, I will try not to stretch it. So, which book? It's this one. Yes, indeed. Thomas Sheridan's Sorcery, the Invocation of Strangeness. I want to congratulate Thomas. If you are watching this book review, accept my honest congratulations for another mind-blowing and amazing book, mate. You have done it. I've read all your books. I have not reviewed any of your books yet, and this is actually my first review, but I'm speechless. I read it twice. I may actually read it one more time to be able to absorb everything more firmly, you know. But this book is fantastically written, presented, put together, and above all, it's what an occult and magic book, philosophical also, and a magic book needs to be. It's everything I was waiting for. I read quite many occult and magic books before, but believe me, this one, it takes all the points. Thomas always writes very concise books, very down to earth. His writing style is very engaging and also quite reachable for people to actually grasp the information presented in his books, and especially dealing with the occult. What Sheridan's aim with this book is, and what he effectively achieved, in my honest opinion, was to open the mind of the reader, and ultimately of the one who seeks knowledge, who is interested in these topics, like myself and others, without spreading around fear, false hopes, and lies. And also to open up the wider spectrum of what occult is, occult topics, occult sciences, the occult tradition, and ultimately what magic is. And I think he did a pretty good job. This book is many things. Above all, what is striking to me as a reader and as a huge fan and admirer of Colin Wilson is actually that this book reads like a Colin Wilson book. What do I mean by that? Well, to start from the very beginning, it doesn't have table of contents, which I don't mind. None of Thomas's books have table of contents, and it's not really necessary. You know, if you open a Colin Wilson book, you will find sort of the chapters, all the chapters in his book. You have chapters, and below the chapters you have everything that's contained in the chapter. It's like a chapter within the chapter within the chapter within the chapter. It's very useful actually. And it's still actually a table of contents if you think about it, but it's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Thomas has chapters, of course, but they are not numbered, you know. I know this is not important to explain, but it's just something I observed, and it's his decision probably. I don't mind, as I said. And of course, within each chapter, each part, you have small chapters. It's quite engaging. It's more easy to absorb the information contained inside. Just a personal opinion. And again, this book reads like a Colin Wilson book, not for the reasons I just specified about the chapters and the table of contents, but it's Thomas's philosophical view of magic, the occult traditions, the origin of magic, symbolism, sacred geometry. He hates that term. He specified in the book, and his very big passion, which is megaliths, you know, and megaliths in mythology, which is in this book. Yes, the Druid Gold, which I plan to review at some point, but I'm here for this book. Yes, as I said, he presents his philosophical view about occult, the occult magic, supernatural, even quantum theory, and other interesting things. I want to read you first the text on the back of the book, and then I will touch upon each chapter and maybe read some segments, and we'll try to stay on topic and be concise and I don't want to stretch this video, as I already mentioned, because it's again, I'm saying I'll probably edit this to make the video a bit shorter. So when you pick up this grimoire, it's good to read this on the back. In Sorcery, the Invocation of Strangeness, Thomas Sheridan presents the reader with his own philosophical insights, as well as a basic introduction into the world of magic and the occult. Representing the author's lifelong fascination with and study of these topics, Sheridan demonstrates how what we call sorcery is very much a living and thriving force within society. From the ancient magical traditions of the proto-shamanic world, of the megalithic builders, to the computer-generated conjurations of today's digital magi, Sheridan outlines the history of sorcery within a fascinating and accessible journey through the art and science of the magical tradition. Along with this, the reader of Sorcery, the Invocation of Strangeness, will discover a world of spells, sigils, folklore, superstitions, and demons. Ooh, spooky, but not so, because read it and you'll see. Is it really just all hocus pocus? Or is it the cutting edge of quantum theory and cosmology, merely rediscovering what the magicians, witches, shamans, and demonologists have always known to be real? Prepare to discover that the world which you thought you knew is actually a very strange place, and what you presently experience as a space-time reality is far more malleable than you ever realized. Nothing will be considered ordinary from this point on. And it will not be considered ordinary when you actually read this book at least 2-3 times. But from first reading, you start questioning many things. Even if you have read books about divination, the occult, magic and witchcraft, and these things and supernatural, you'll still be blown away, because what he does and what I really enjoy about his work is it's the simplicity of presenting these topics and ideas in a down-to-earth and also very approachable manner. Not really exaggerating. Haven't seen that even in his first books, Puzzling People and Defeated Demons, which I consider the pillar of his work personally, because I first read the Puzzling People. That was my first book I read by Thomas Sheridan. And again, I was interested in psychopathology and psychopaths, but I virtually knew nothing about the topic. After I read the 2 books, blown away. I had a mini Big Bang inside my head, sort of a microcosm within the macrocosm, and as above, so below, and so forth. Well, here I am still babbling. I need to speak about the contents of this book. One other thing also, it's getting a bit dark here. I wanna give a shout out to David Halpin from the Occult book review. He's doing an amazing job. I've watched all his videos, so keep up the the amazing work, mate. And yes, quite inspired by your reviews. And also, I won't be able to cover everything contained in this book for obvious reasons. It's quite a lot of information to cover, but at least I will try to synthesize and talk about what are, in my opinion, the most important aspects. Right. First chapter of this book is entitled on becoming visible and invisible, and he starts by talking about H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos and the importance of one's own imagination. And he speaks about the idea of the unconscious represented by the deep waters, and that leads immediately to things like Jungian psychology, archetypes, and basically monsters from deep within, the deep waters are the monsters we actually face in our lives. They can manifest. You can have real physical monsters in lakes, in rivers, in the oceans, but you can also view the idea as human beings implementing our own monsters, and that's a cool idea. And also he proposed that this, right now, some people may view it as the Kali Yuga, but in Lovecraftian terms we can view it as the Aeon of Cthulhu, which in many ways is.
Magic is always the tactic of last resort for those who refuse to give up hope. You do not summon Cthulhu to help you find the TV remote. You only visit the witch at the end of the village when all other options have been explored, for she is the lone shark of the gods.
Sheridan then goes on to talk about Lovecraft and Crowley's possible connection, and in particular Lovecraft's involvement of magic, the writing of the so-called infamous Necronomicon, or the Book of the Mad Arab, which origins are still not really clear. Everyone has his own opinion about it, and that's probably the part of the magic of Lovecraft's magic. And terrible flies today. He then goes on to talk about Crowley's adventures in Scotland and the famous Abramelin ritual, which caused the appearance of the Loch Ness monster, which in my opinion has to be one of the most likely scenarios that happened there. And there are of course many theories, but Crowley's ritual unleashed something in that lake, and the reason why it's not so easily explained, well documented, poorly photographed like UFOs for example, is because it's not of this world. It's some sort of elemental, either physical form or non-physical,
or maybe stuck between. Thomas actually made quite a good video about this. Check his channel, Open Source Occult TV, and his other main channel, Thomas Sheridan. And I do believe personally, because he left the ritual unfinished, and you don't do this in magic. When you start at the beginning, you have to finish. You start at the absolute zero, at the negative point. You reach a certain level, and then if you disconnect whatever you are onto, then of course, like in any electrical system, you get a malfunction. And in Crowley's case, reality started malfunctioning and unleashed the monsters of the deep. He ties all of this with consciousness, the origins of consciousness. He talks about how some years ago he had a dream, a voice speaking to him. In reality, was probably his subconscious mind warning him, giving him clues about consciousness, about how we came to be conscious beings. And it's very interesting story. You can of course read it yourself in this book. He then continues to explain how ancient people, our far ancestors, viewed magic and sorcery, how they use the natural environment to first for basic survival, then developing ritualistic views, ritualistic lifestyle, up to actual magic practices inside chambers, inside stone circles, inside caves, and in this day and age, inside the digital magi, in the internet. He also points out that the cross is obviously not a Christian symbol, and its origins reaching far back in primeval times, when ancient human beings, our ancestors, used the magic that was brought from up there, from the sun down to trees, and from trees the initial magical spark was unleashed, rubbing two sticks together, and at the center of the sticks there is the source of everything, the spark, the initial spark. In sorcery, the Invocation of Strangeness, the reader, it's not really necessary, but it's a vital thing to do. And I did it myself many times with other titles, and especially this one. The reader needs to always adopt a magical and occult perspective, a viewpoint, even a mindset, like Gordon White states in the Chaos Protocols. One has to adopt a chaos magic perspective to be able to absorb the information contained inside the book. And it is a must. It's not, of course, it's optional. It's not something that everyone should do, but having that in mind really helps a lot, absorbing what is written in occult books, in this book, in other titles. one of the more major things I really like about Sheridan's work is that he's always, in his lectures, in his early books, in his blog posts, in his writings, he's taking a solid, firm, pagan perspective, and that really is evident. And it actually very few writers and very few researchers, very few people nowadays are doing that, and I think it's quite necessary. As Europeans, we should always seek to express our heritage and abandon everything, abandon all Abrahamic aspects of life, adopting a pagan perspective and pagan view of life, and having a spirituality close to our ancestors also helps a person to view things, historical events, mythological, even spiritual matters more easily. And it's more easily to differentiate all the crap from the actual truth. Truth, not truth. And Thomas writes about Saint Patrick, the alleged famous saint that Christianized Ireland peacefully, and everything was hunky-dory, and they had a good time without force. When the actual truth is that Thomas writes, and this is one of his theories, but personally I think it holds a lot of truth, is that Saint Patrick didn't really existed. He was more of an idea or a system, sort of a system unleashed by the Vatican, by the Roman Empire, to sort of brainwash people and make the Christianization of certain countries, especially Ireland, by the 5th century. He also explains how the Druids had the skill, the abilities, and the magic to become invisible, and that the infamous Saint Patrick wanted to acquire the same skill, knowledge, and power to become invisible. And what becoming invisible really meant was infiltrating the Catholic Church, sort of also not really showing oneself as a Druid, and in a few simple words, being undercover. And that's why invisibility was so crucial for the continuation and survival of pagan and other spiritual practices nowadays. Thomas is also stressing the need of seclusion and secrecy when one is practicing sorcery and magic. And that is one aspect that many people, those Wiccans, New Agers, and whoever is self-proclaimed pagan and dealing with the occult and practicing magician, is not really taking in consideration. And personally, I'm completely against openly showing your altar, practicing, doing a personal magical rituals. Even sigils are a personal thing. You don't write a sigil and just show it to the whole internet or shout it in the streets. You do it in seclusion. You do it alone. You do it in darkness. You do it in complete isolation. Even your he then later explains that even your conscious mind has to forget about the sigil when it's done, and that's one of the steps of actually helping the whole process, or just forgetting about this, that you casted a sigil or made a sigil, and that's how it works, really. I just want to quickly read you one or two segments that I do really think they shine. That's about the seclusion and the need for secrecy and seclusion in sorcery and magic. Magic rituals are designed to be very much personal and secretive operations, and are not to be openly broadcast to the world at large. The magic circle has no integrity when it occurs, and the blowback for the both magician and observers aware that a magical ritual is taking place can be risky. You build a fortress of conscious will, and you defend it. The hedge schools of Old Ireland were successful because the students were bound to secrecy. This infused the experience with an emotional and psychological charge that further infused the entire experience within a powerful sense of underlying magical vitality. If you plant a fruit orchard, you must protect it, or you will not have a fruit orchard. More specifically, magical rituals and ceremonies are held in darkness and seclusion, not because they are evil or sinister, but because our five senses are less subject to exterior sensory distraction when we are surrounded and enclosed by a wall of darkness. Secondary to this is that our senses become extremely heightened within the confines of the darkened space. Removing the totality of full cognitive and sensory awareness from around us and replacing it with darkness, while also including a single point of light for cognitive focus, such as fire or candle flame to target our will upon. Magic has gone the way of romantic intimacy, broadcasted to the world, and the power of the experience is gone. Sorcery must be secretive and precious. He also writes about the immediate assumption that when people hear magic and sorcery, they think they're something evil, that sorcery and magic is only a tool for the wicked, those types of rejects of society, and etc. But in reality, just a quick quote, Aleister Crowley once famously remarked that black magic was any kind of sorcery which is not concerned with the mystical self or personal development. This can be taken as meaning that any form of sorcery which is studied or performed to affect the cause or cause change in other individuals without their granted permission is black magic. Although, in order to ensure one's survival while being attacked by others, using magic in this manner is perfectly acceptable. This is an understandable use of tactical sorcery. The rules of magical engagement are quite clear on this. Do no harm to others unless they are trying to harm you without good cause. And yes, it's absolutely vital to differentiate the ones that really practice black magic and the ones that are nowhere near that spectrum. He writes about how the elites are using a form of a black magic which is in reality what he calls it trash magic, in the hands of the bureaucrats, the ones in governments, politicians, corporations, etc. And he ends the first chapter by explaining the concept of sacrifice, giving examples with Odin and various other examples that one needs to sacrifice something to gain something, sacrificing one form of energy to gain another one. And in magical practices, sacrifice is always something that needs to be considered. And we're not talking about animal sacrifice or other forms of sacrifice. Sacrifice can be anything. From sacrificing alcohol, cigarettes, a bad way of life, and gaining something that will make your life better, healthier, more spiritually heightened, is also a form of sacrifice. And personally, I sacrifice many things, like, of course, many others. But people nowadays, they forgot the concept of sacrifice. And everyone wants to gain without give anything in return. Even our ancestors understood that something has to be given in order to receive something in return.
In the second part of the book, Sheridan goes on to write about the magical class system and that it's really in existence, and that the elites have been aware of it for centuries and still are. He also writes about the Soviet Union's involvement with magic and the study of the occult. He cites how in 1991, in a conference sponsored by none other than the Soros Foundation, after the fall of the Soviet Union, American and other elites, scientists, and other figures gathered at Fordham University to discuss how they will claim the magic and occult literature and occult books of the commies, basically. And why would the elites want occult and magic books or anything to do with magic and so-called spiritual sciences? Why would they want such things in their possession? Because, as Thomas is explaining, they are very much interested in these things. It was the same with the Nazis, and it's the same with the Soviet Union. Atheism for the masses, and occult and sorcery for the elites. What I really enjoyed reading about in this book and in the second chapter was about the Chernobyl disaster. Not many, I presume, people made the connection that the whole Chernobyl disaster was actually a very, very deep and real magical process, even a magical ritual. It was either on purpose or instinctive sorcery, but he goes on to explain that even the very area in Ukraine was actually steeped in magic and mythology and in sorcery, and the term Chernobyl in Russian or Ukrainian is the same language. It actually means wormwood. And funny thing is that because in my language, in Bulgarian, the old women in the rural areas, I think they are still actually doing it, but when I was like a child growing in on my village, I remember my grandma was like, when she was used to call out the chickens and the turkeys, she was like saying chur, chur all the time, which is strange. It's like sort of this folk magic tradition that sort of went with time, and the old people sort of subconsciously had remember the words, and but maybe they forgot what they meant. It just sort of left an imprint, and that's interesting to point. It's very fascinating. I've always been fascinated by the Chernobyl disaster as a native living here on the Balkans. It happened in 1986. I was not born yet, but my brother was. He was like 2 years old. He's probably not remembering anything, but the imprint is there in people's minds. And it's interesting that, wait, what happened to my black shirt? You know, magic is everywhere. And yeah, Curse of Chernobyl. It's as scary, as fascinating, and as deep and magical as it is occultic in nature. Topic of all times, and will remain as significant as any major event in human history. So to conclude this short review, I need to say a few other things about this book. It has to be one of the most important book that came out in recent years concerning the occult, magic, the nature of reality, consciousness, physics, sigils, chaos magic, everything put together. I certainly view this book as also a philosophical treatise on the subject by the author, as well as a compendium of subjects that are as valid as they were in the early Victorian era until nowadays. And I haven't even scratched the surface of this book. I mainly discussed most of the first chapter, the contents of the first chapter, and going further along the road and delving deep into archetype concepts such as the auric body, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the nature of time, folk magic, poetry with important figures during the early 20th century, and the spiritualist and occult revival of Europe, such as William Butler Yeats, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, and a few others. Jack Parsons was essentially responsible for taking human beings up there. Yeah, on the moon. And yeah, we went to the moon. Why it's so hard for people to just make 1 + 1? I don't buy the in your face conspiracy thing about faking the moon landing and Stanley Kubrick's involvement. And why would they take such enormous efforts and risks of faking something that could have been achieved, in my opinion, even earlier? And yeah, I'm not here to discuss the authenticity of the moon landings or the conspiracy behind it, or if it was faked. I personally don't believe it was. And yeah, Jack Parsons was a highly influential figure and highly significant for the achievement of us landing on the moon. His jet rocket propulsion experiments and methods were highly significant, and he was a pioneer of his age. But one thing that NASA and other scientists are not acknowledging was that he was also a highly involved individual in the magic circles. Yeah, he was devoted to Thelema. He was a Thelemite. And yeah, I recently watched the Strange Angel TV series about Jack Parsons, the first season, which is very, very good, nicely executed, nicely done, very, very good TV series, and I highly recommend for anyone to, if anyone is interested, to go and see it. Among all the crap nowadays, one of the few shows that I really enjoyed watching this year. Yeah, it's called Strange Angel, and it's about the early life of Jack Parsons, his experiments and his involvement in the American branch of Thelema. Thomas talks about the chaos magic movement of the early 70s, which was a significant and highly important part of the revival of magical movements, and continuing along in the footsteps of important movements such as the OTO and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. The Chaos Movement and the Occult Revival of the 70s and the late 80s, which was kickstarted by figures such as Robert Anton Wilson, Peter J. Carroll, and Ray Sherwin, and many others later. The chaos magic movement has a long history, and the initial spark was ignited by figures such as Austin Osman Spare, Jack Parsons, even Terence McKenna to some point, hugely actually. The chaos magic movement was highly influential during the also during the height of the Satanic Panic era of the late 80s, if I'm not mistaken. Even the 90s. It was popular in every aspect of life. Movie directors took aspects of it, musicians also, writers, even game development teams were highly inspired by the concepts of the chaos magic movement. He explains in great detail about the 5 stages of ritual and folk magic, which he also did in his book, The Anvil of the Psyche, which I really enjoyed and which I will also review at some point. I actually plan to review all of his books at some point. And the 5 stages of ritual and folk magic are a fairly grounded and substantial part of the practicing magician. And one cannot achieve much without climbing the first step up to the last one. It's like with everything in life. You have to make efforts. You have to put a saddle on the devil's back, so to speak, to be able to get results. He has a chapter on the revival of spiritualism, the Theosophists, as well as other figures. He also explains about the cunning men and women, which were the earliest during the Victorian era in London. Folk magic practitioners. Those were the poor, quote unquote, uneducated types, which still carried the tradition from their forefathers and the family line. Bringing all of this together and tying it with the chaos magic and the chaos magic movement, he then explains how to successfully construct your own sigil, your own chaos magical sigil, and how to successfully charge it and make it work, which I think is a very useful chapter in the book. It's very practical, and it's also very simple, but it works. Hacking the so-called operating system of the universe can be achieved by things and by taking actions such as sigil construction, sigil magic, and later on other ways. Sigils are also very much like electronic circuits, which he explains. He even included here to basically illustrate that inside our computers, inside our cameras, inside our phones, inside electronics, the electronic circuits, electronic currents, they very much look like a sigil. They look like sigils. He also included a chapter on magical symbolism and geometric sorcery. In other words, sacred geometry, which again he doesn't like that term. He also gives some examples and parallels with the tarot, and especially the Fool card, how it acts, how it illustrates the archetypal image of the shaman and the seeker, the one that is stepping on its the one that is essentially embarking on his own journey and taking steps toward very magical and very profound way of living, and essentially seeking gnosis. He also explains the use of the hexagon and the hexagram, how it's a deeply profound magical symbol, basically two triangles interlacing. It's the dualistic aspect of the universe, and as everything in this universe, we have pairs of opposites, male, female, day, night, black and white, sweet and bitter, Coke and Pepsi. He gives a proper explanation of the six-pointed star, which is also known as the Star of David, or most commonly known as the Seal of Solomon. Yes. And its origins are very go far back in the history. It's not connected with world Jewry and Judaism only. Jews use it, yes, of course, but it's also found in Buddhism, in Eastern philosophy, and in other Eastern religions. He also speaks about John Foster Forbes, one of the earliest archaeological mavericks of the 20th century. He concludes the book with a short chapter on dark sorcery and dark occultism. And he gives a few examples of our position in the world of magic and sorcery, and how safe are we. He also gives a few examples and underlies the importance of minerals such as salt, quartz, and shungite. He recommends also any person, even not practicing any magical path, to implement quartz, and if one can find shungite in his or her own life, because these minerals are the essential counterpart of deflecting negative forces and guarding our psyche as well as our spiritual energy, and swimming towards more positive, more useful, and more grounded in so-called positive and practical white magic. There is no really such thing as black or white magic, vice versa. But what I'm trying to say here is going in the right direction. So it has to be already obvious that I consider this book, Sorcery, The Invocation of Strangeness, by Thomas Sheridan, as my favorite book of 2018. It's absolutely a book which I will go back into, deep in, and find things that can help me and can expand my knowledge. And I highly recommend it for anyone, even without a prior knowledge of the occult, magic, sorcery, or spiritual and paranormal and supernatural topics. This book can really enrich your life and expand your knowledge and make you aware of the existence of such subjects, and that they are really a very real, useful if we know how to use them, and also highly destructive forces if they're used against us by those that are intended to harm us. And we can take control by knowing about these things and not going in this dark, selfish and hugely destructive path. And yes, Sorcery, once again, The Invocation of Strangeness by Thomas Sheridan. Highly recommend it. Get it, read it, and get to know the secrets of the universe. Thank you for watching, and see you on the next OuroBoris book review.
The circle is a paradox. No beginning, no end, but bounded. In each circle, there are 4 essential phases. We consecrate the circles, open the chamber with the magic squares, pass through. 5 circles, 5 elements, 5 realms. This circle, this is the chamber of effect, element of wood, where we seal our vessel from the world, make it safe against attack. This one, the chamber of the song. We push off into the void on our journey. Element of fire. The blackness. The boundless, where we sink into the abyss. The tangible. Earth, metal, water. The cycle. Now this middle circle, this is nameless. This is where your angel will appear. You will ask your favour, and I will ask mine. This world will be merged with other worlds. Others will hear. Now, the Abramelin, it's essentially a journey. That's a poor metaphor, that is, but it will do for now.
Love is the law. Will is the core. Chaos its well. And holy the war.